Hi, I'm Alexa Ray Corriea, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook podcast. I had the great opportunity to talk to Jaclyn Seto, a current writer, and Christal Hazelton, a former writer on Apex Legends. We talked about character creation and methodologies in writing and narrative design, especially in representation in games and writing for live services games. They are excellent character creators, and we did go into depth about the legends that they did make, Alter and Conduit. So if you're a big Apex fan, this one's for you. Please enjoy. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you guys. Finally.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. The question that I open whenever I interview fellow writers, fellow narrative designers, that opening question, how did you find yourself here writing for video games? And you can, Jackie, you go first, and then Christal, you can answer.
Sure. Yeah. So it was kind of a winding road for me because I always wanted to do game writing, but it was something that I didn't know how to get into, which I think was a lot of people's issue back in the day, which was not actually that long ago. But yeah, I'd been writing fan fiction all my life, essentially. And I didn't really want to do anything else. I wanted to actually be a novelist, but my parents were like, that's not practical. You can't make money doing that. So I ended up getting a degree in kinesiology. And if you don't know what kinesiology is, it's basically the study of human body movement. So it's the path to becoming a therapist in a lot of cases. But as I did that, I realized that I really did not fit in with that crowd, nor did I really like the work that much. It was interesting, but it was scary for me to have that kind of responsibility for other people's health. So it was a lot of pressure, and it took a lot on my mental health. And I was like, I can't do this. I need to do something with writing. So I actually went into medical policy analyst and writing for a little bit. Was a technical writer for that. And then I saw one of my coworkers go off and get her dream job, which was in stem cell research. So it was completely unrelated, but she was so happy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to have that feeling. And writing was the only thing that kind of evoked that sort of response from me. And so I decided to go back to school for game writing after that. It wasn't a thing that was very common, especially where I live right now, because I was in Vancouver, BC, and we don't really have college programs for that or anything, so no. I didn't know what to do. Yeah, so I ended up actually finding a program at Vancouver Film School where they teach you writing for film, TV, and games, and that was actually a really new program as well. But it was a one-year program. I did that really quick, and after I got out, I was like, well, I've tried the other career paths already. I can't fail at this. And so I was really just buckling down and trying to get into the industry. And that's how I ended up here.
Was Apex, writing for Apex, was that your first in-house job?
It was my first in-house job, yes. Before that, I was freelancing on a mobile game. And I think I worked on 2 games for that studio that I was freelancing at. But yes. Apex is my first in-house game, and it was really nice too because I had been basically obsessed with Apex Legends for 2-3 years before that.
Awesome. Christal
Rose, actually.
Christal Rose, that's right.
Yeah. I didn't know that I wanted to be a game writer. Unlike Jaclyn, it took me until I was already in the industry to sort of realize that was a job. So I went to college, and I was trying to be really realistic about what could get me a job. And I was a math major for a hot second. Even though I really liked math, I did not enjoy being in the that program. So then I hard swerved to being a painting major, hated that possibly more. And then I realized that I wanted to work in animation and I wanted to be a storyboard artist. So I switched to the program that was most like that because I didn't have an animation program at the time. And I took the game design courses. Quickly realized that I did not have the patience to be an animator and like keyframe because I liked 2D animation more, and found writing but didn't really know what I could do there. So I did research and I got like a social justice minor, and then after graduation I started working at like a small games company in Salt Lake. We're doing mobile games. And then after I started working there, I realized how many different jobs there were in games and found out that game writing is a thing. I mean, like logically, someone writes it and like puts it together and like casts and voices and things like that. But I didn't know anyone who worked in the games industry before actually working in the games industry. So after talking to like a bunch of different people about like their jobs and their experiences and like what they had done, I ended up applying for a games writing role, and I got it.
Amazing. What I'm hearing from both of you, and something that I also hear from a lot of other people, is when you realize, oh yeah, I guess I could get a job writing for games, it feels impenetrable. Like there's no way to really understand, like, how do I get that job? And like we all kind of came into it like a couple years ago, but do you feel like that impenetrability is like still kind of present now?
I think it comes and goes in waves. Like just a few years ago, like there wasn't really a game writer role that was more looped into narrative design, and like a few years before that, narrative design was new, and it was looped into other roles. And I think there are spots of time where game writing is easier to get into than others. I think right now is probably not that time, unfortunately. And I talked to a lot of students who have a lot of anxiety about that, and I was one of those students who had a lot of anxiety about that. So I completely understand where they're coming from. So
yeah,
depends.
I love that you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, also where with like the current day where the industry is with all the layoffs and everything, it feels especially impenetrable because there's like a ton of talented writers who've just gotten laid off and everything, and everyone's just sort of competing over the same jobs. So imagine being someone new to the industry and trying to get in and competing with all those people who have like several years of experience compared to you.
And associate level jobs are already so rare, and internships aren't helpful if you've been out of school for a year. So
no, it is a bummer, and it's something that I, as an elder, I like think about it every day.
An elder. Okay, Alexa.
An elder. No, for real. Like, what is it? What did the GDC survey? It was like women leave the industry on an average of like 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
So when you hit 7, someone told me you get woods witch status, and I hit 7 this year. So I get to be the like Ursula in the cave that people come to for advice, which I'm totally fine with.
Nice.
Hard pivot away from this super bummer topic. I wanted to ask you about fan fiction, because I also taught myself how to writing fan fiction, like in my parents' basement as a teenager, instead of like going out and drinking at parties.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when you were writing fan fiction, like that's a self-taught skill? And is there anything you kind of picked up in that time of writing that you kind of brought with you into your writing career?
Hard to say, because it wasn't something I ever did consciously, I guess. I mean, anything that I picked up, because for sure it helped me a lot develop my writing skills. I think maybe it was like really great at helping me hone my instincts, really. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it actually brought, but I I can say that I have a pretty good eye for like pacing now when I write things. And of course, like just getting into somebody else's IP and absorbing their characters, how to write them, like how they talk, all of those things. It was really, really helpful with that.
I frequently tell like new writers starting out, like if you have fan fiction, like put that in your portfolio. Because like you said, it is actually a really good way to show that you can adapt an IP.
Yeah. And you know, when I was first starting out, I had a couple more mentors as well. So one of my instructors was like, yeah, do fan fiction. And then my other instructor was like, no, don't do fan fiction. So I tototally agree with you, Alexa, but I think there are different perspectives in the industry about whether or not like people actually want to see it in portfolios. Yeah.
I think it can be a little bit dangerous to put fan fiction in your portfolio.
Yeah.
Because then some people at the studios will be like, well, why are you applying here if you're writing fan fiction for this? So fan fiction games wise, I think is, like I said, a little dangerous. But I think if you're adapting like a novel or doing a spin off of that, it's probably a little bit safer.
Yeah, I find that really interesting too, because especially if you're trying to make your way into the TV industry, that is like the main thing that you should have, like a TV spec script, right? Which is basically fan fiction for TV shows.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a lot of big opinions about fan fiction and women-dominated spaces and fan-created content and how it's looked down upon. Yeah. There are studies showing that teenage girls are the most socially aware humans and can pick up on dynamics between people really quickly. And like because of that, they can be really brutal. And like because you're under such a close microscope, being young and a woman and like having no power, you channel power in ways that you can, and that's why there's like a lot of queer and minority people in like the fandom spaces as well. It's because they're trying to like see themselves in those avenues and create their own dynamics through that, and then everybody continues to look down on them when it's like a female women dominated space, especially like a young girl space, and then the same attributes aren't looked down upon when it's men in other avenues like sports. Like you are a fanatic if you are like a fangirl and you're like crazy and obsessive and like weird, but if you're a man doing those things, you have a perfectly fine hobby and like it's fine for you to be crazy. So
it's so true. Oh, sorry.
That's my detour.
No, it is true. No, you are absolutely right.
And that's why I think it's really dangerous for students to write fan fiction and put it in their portfolio, because some people will hold that against you. They'll hold your passion against you.
I never thought of that. I'm gonna stop doing that. That's a good point.
No, I mean, you can recommend what you want. I think it's a really good way. You're right. I think it's a really excellent way to hone your skills and like getting tone and getting pacing and being able to adapt things, because that's a lot of what games is. But yeah, I just think there's some negative perspectives in the industry for sure.
You are right.
Interestingly enough, I actually never felt comfortable talking about my love of fan fiction like publicly or just openly until I started working in the game industry, because a lot of people around me are interested in the same things. And I guess before it just didn't feel acceptable to be like quote unquote nerdy. So that is one of the positive things, I guess, about it.
Yeah, I will say, I think until I started working in games, I never really found I never found the other girls who grew up writing fan fiction or the other people that are into like the really, what you would say the quote unquote traditionally nerdy things, AKA what you just said, Christal Rose, everything that's not sports, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that's a kind of a benefit of this industry, is like all the weird kids ended up here.
So true.
So we're all just weird kids together. Speaking of weird kids, Apex Legends.
That was a great segue.
My brain went weird kids, unique people, large ensemble cast of characters, Apex Legends. I don't know. My brain does that ADHD thing.
I see how you got there.
It makes the chain in my head, but I don't verbalize it. It's like I never showed my work when I was doing math. So like, that's what just happened. Anyway, you both write on Apex, which is super successful and people really love it. And it has been around for, oh my gosh, how many years now? It's been around for quite a while.
5 years?
Yeah,
5 years.
5.
And going super strong. So Apex is a live services game. So I would love to hear from you both about the difference in approach for writing for what people think of as writing for a traditional game, something linear, something that is not constantly evolving, versus a live services game and all the components that you have to think about for live services that you don't necessarily have to for a normal game, a traditional game.
In terms of storytelling, I think about it as a really, really, really slow soap opera, which is
okay.
Yeah, because you have a huge cast of characters. Everyone sort of has their own, story arc, storyline, things that are going on with them, and there's only so much that we can do season to season to tell that story, especially with like that amount of characters. And if you've ever seen a soap opera, the one storyline that they have will go on for like months and months and months and months, even though this TV show is airing 5 days a week. I feel like a little bit that's what Apex feels like. Not in a bad way. I love it, of course, but it does take a long time to like get to the end of somebody's story arc and things like that. And of course, because we're always doing things season to season, we have to really think carefully about how that fits in with whatever design updates they're making, whichever season happens. So there's a lot of that, and the flexibility that goes into figuring out how do we fit the storyline into the current design that's going to be happening for this update. Things like that. Yeah, it requires a lot of flexibility.
And unlike a linear story that ships in like 3 to 5 years, you're shipping every 3 months. And so while the storytelling pace is, can be a bit slower, it's very extended. You have to make sure that there's always a thread open, even if you're closing a thread, just because you know that the game has to continue going on. But you have to gauge where people are going to be at in 1 to 2 years, because you're writing so far ahead. But again, you're shipping every 3 months. Like, you have to have deliverables. The game has to work. And so when you're writing on a live service game versus other types of game, you are writing now. You are writing 2 years in the future. You're writing a year in the future. Like, there is no time for you to look through everything that you're doing, because you're living in different time zones the whole time.
Yeah, you're living in the future when you're writing a live services game.
The pace is so fast, and that's something I don't think people understand about. I think people sometimes look down their noses at writing for live service, but like, you are cranking out text week in and week out for live service.
You don't really have a lot of time to like reflect back either on like what you just wrote because of that. Like, there'll be things that come out, I don't know, 6 months later that you wrote 6 months before. But you're so busy working on like the new thing that you're like, oh, wait, this is just coming out now. And then people are responding to it. And then it's like, oh, maybe this wasn't a great response to this, but we don't really have time to pivot in the next like 6 months, because the next 6 months of writing is already done. We can only, work on it after that. Yeah.
And Jaclyn and I play Apex together sometimes, and every once in a while I'll be like, this line slaps, this is hilarious, and she'll be like, oh, you wrote that? And I'll be like, oh, I am so good at this, because you really can't remember everything that's going on, because there's so many things going on.
Yeah, that is one benefit of it as well, though. Like, it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, yes, you're just like, you're going and going and going, and you constantly forget what's happening. But at the same time, it's really nice. You don't have to wait like 5 years for your game to ship. Like, it just comes out.
It ships every 3 months, but it ships every 3 months. So
And that is a huge credit. Like, I know the credit is one game, but like when you're shipping every 3 months, that's like a new credit. So
just especially if like you've had a lot of projects canceled or like a lot of content cut in your career, like seeing it ship every 3 months is just like, it heals something in you.
You got it. I love that. I feel slightly comforted knowing that someone else also forgets what they write, because this happens to me all the time. I'll like play something, we'll be like playing the build or something, and I'll be like, wow, good job, team. And they're like, you wrote that line. And I'll just be like, oh, okay.
No wonder why it's exactly my speed.
No wonder. I love it so much. You mentioned that you don't have a lot of time to reflect on what you've written because the next thing has to get done. So what is the editing and feedback pipeline like for writing for live services if you don't have that much time to reflect on it?
It's, in my experience, a lot more collaborative with your team than working on like a single player focused game, because there's not a lot of time to reflect, you need to get second and third opinions from everyone else on your team to be like, hey, is this lore accurate? Like, hey, do you think the voice is right on this? Just because you're trying to go quick.
Yeah, and I feel like you have to let mistakes go a little bit more easily because you can't go back to fix things. It's just things lock, and you've done your best to make sure everything's lore accurate, things like that. But when it ships, maybe a fan will point out like, this is kind of off compared to like what they've done in the past, and you can't really do anything about that because you had to lock that down in like a certain period of time and you did your best, but that's just the way it happened.
But it doesn't mean like that the content isn't shipping with like an incredibly high quality. It's just that like there are like 4 content passes over the thing that you're working on. Like you don't have time to like noodle and like doodle on it. So you have to get good quick.
Yeah, it's not like you can come back to it like 3 weeks later, because sometimes your brain just needs to rest, and then you'll come back to it and things will be better. But you got to get eyes on it as fast as possible, as many eyes on it as possible to get that out.
You also have to like study the IP like really hard.
Yeah. I can imagine that's Apex, it's a lot.
Flexible.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
Yes, because like you mentioned that, Christal Rose, like you really have to know what other people are working on too.
Yes.
Because the lore is expanding so quickly with like how many other writers are working on the team, and everyone's like working on something different, right? So you have to know what people are working on, because it's like, okay, well, this is happening in like this season. So can I have like the storyline work on this? And it's like, no, because this character is actually doing this. And if they do that first, then this character can't do that other thing. And it gets messy quick if you don't know what's going on with the other writers.
Yeah, and that's how like Jaclyn and I became close really fast, which it was really funny because the team thought we knew each other before we started the job, and I was like, no. I slid into her DMs on day 1, and then we just like kept talking to each other to like check each other's like work and answered questions, mostly Jaclyn answering my questions on the lore because she was a day 1 player and I wasn't.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
So Jaclyn, are you very like, your brain is just a full-on repository of Apex lore?
It is, but honestly, okay, that's the other thing, going back to fan fiction that has helped me a lot, because I wouldn't say like when on the first playthrough or watch of like whatever IP I'm absorbing, I'll get all of that stuff, but then I'll read fan fiction and everyone else is so into all of that, they're like dialed in, and I will just absorb it because I'm reading the fan fiction. Not that I read Apex Legends fan fiction, I've never done that before. I swear. Okay. I swear, but like that's how I've learned a lot of lore from like other fandoms.
Okay. I was going to ask, have you, have you looked at what fans are writing about Apex Legends? But it sounds like no.
No, I don't do that because I don't want it to affect like my own writing on the game, things like that.
I would look at fan art quite a lot, but I never read the fan fiction.
Yeah. Fan art's great. I just can't read the fan fiction because, you know, I don't want anyone to think like...
It's also legally dicey, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. We did that for the game that became Modern Warfare 3. We started reading fan fiction when we got that assignment because we wanted to see what the girly pops were fixated on. And that's a story I can't tell on a recording, but we'll talk about it some other day.
Yeah. I do love to see what the girly pops are fixating on, because like it's so funny. It's always like a very big inverse of what the property is currently talking about.
It is. You are correct. I think the thing, so like AO3 released their like popular tags like from the prior year in like January or whatever, and of the franchises, like the two most popular were like Harry Potter and Call of Duty was like up there. It was like in like the top 5. And it was this one specific romantic pairing. It was 2 of the guys. And there was a lot of really beautiful fan fiction about these 2 men. And we really appreciated that, but that's not something that we could do anyway. Yes, fan fiction, slippery slope. When you are writing, so when you're writing in these like 3-month sprints and you have a lot of stuff you have to make quickly, you mentioned that you have to work really closely with design. Does the design updates and gameplay stuff come first, and then you kind of have to write around that or build new characters around that concept? Or are those 2 features that you work with, like you develop them in parallel, or does one come before the other?
Well, it's no secret that Respawn is a design-first studio, so it's usually that design is, you know, doing their thing, figuring out what's fun, figuring out what's coming up, and then they'll loop us in and ask, like, how can we, you know, tie the lore into this? If there's an upcoming character, like, how can we tie them into that? Things like that. So it is, for Respawn specifically, it's a bit more design-focused.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Does that also, you mentioned for characters, do they come up with the like gameplay first of like, this is the kind of element or thing that we want to do, and then you guys figure out how you want to build the character around it? Or do you pitch a character first?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've done things in the past where it's like, we want this type of character, but normally that doesn't go through unless it sort of fits with the prototype that design comes up with. It's usually design, like I said, they come up with, they're playing around, figuring out what's fun and everything, and then they'll come to us with the prototype. And it's usually, they'll bring in art, narrative, and of course, like, it'll be like us 3 teams jamming about like, design will say like, we want this character to sort of play like this and feel like this. And from that, we'll sort of jam around and figure out what personality, what fantasy fits really well with that sort of gameplay and style. And that's kind of where we figure that out and then go to figuring out what's the personality, what's the backstory, and then we'll build up from there with the rest of the character.
When you are in the process of character creation, how do you check yourself along the way when you're trying to figure out, oh, am I hitting all of the gameplay tenets that I'm supposed to? Am I hitting the goal? Am I making something that's popular? Am I making something different? Like, where is that? Like, what is the editing process like for you when you're building a character?
So one of the things that you have to really remember when you go into creating character is that it doesn't just belong to you. So we have constant feedback cycles, like weekly, about whether or not things are working. And, you know, doesn't matter which team is talking, or, you know, they have their expertise and everything, but you can always offer your own feedback on whatever they are working on, and vice versa. So the art team can come back to narrative and say like, hey, this kind of feels off for this type of character, and then we'll have a discussion about like how we can work on that and like change it. So it's a really collaborative effort all around. Yeah, you can't have too much ego and say like, this is my thing, it belongs to me, you have no say. Yeah, it's just everyone has a voice in that room.
Even though it's like good to get all that feedback, like you also have to remember that like you know, you are the one like writing the voice, and like to take in that feedback and like distill it and like think about it, and like at times, you know, like push back and be like, well, all of this is too much. And then you go back and you talk to your lead and you talk to the members of your team and you go, so what do you think? Because I don't have any thoughts anymore on what to do. I'm at the point where I'm like, I'll do what you want.
Yeah, it's very much like at the end of the day, you can give all that feedback, but whoever is the expert at that specific thing that, you know, the feedback's coming in from, then they get to make the ultimate decision on like the direction that we go with that.
For you, when do you feel like the feedback process for a character is done and the character is like baked? Like, is that a feeling for you of like, yes, this is it? Or is it one of those things where we have 3 months, we just kind of have to say, this is it, and we move on? Like, what is that completion realization moment like for you?
I think for me, it was in a state of, there were pieces for Conduit, there were pieces that I couldn't super decide on, and then there were other pieces that were super set to me. And then as time went on, I kind of got more and more confused. so actually getting the casting the voice actor and like listening to the voice and like having those sides done solidified some of the pieces that I was really unsure about. So for me, it was more external, because I could have polished her into oblivion. I could have waffled back and forth on some of the pieces. I kept going back and forth. So the fact that, you know, it was super fast and it was, you know, a really long process too, that there was like a set end date was really, really good.
I think for me, it was, excuse me. I think for me, it was when her like Alter's dialogue suite was done, because then like I had already locked in pretty hard on what the personality and what her backstory was and everything. So when, you know, art or animation came to me and asked me like, would she do this, I could answer those questions. But her voice was still kind of up in the air around that time as well. So once the dialogue was all written, I was kind of like, okay, well, I know this character now. Like, I really know them inside and out. And it became a lot easier to like just figure out the types of things that she would say and all that. Even when we were casting the voice, I think we had we had kind of a difficult time casting Alter, because she has such a specific personality. It was really hard to find like the right person to bring that out of her. But when I heard this voice actor, I was like, I think this is the one. And when I heard her in the callbacks for that, I didn't doubt my instincts anymore. After that, I was like, I know this character, because like,
I doubted my instincts the whole time. It was awful. It was awful. I just like what I had an idea for her backstory and I had an idea for her personality, but there were like different ways that the team wanted her to go, so we ended up pivoting to those things. But I also felt this really big responsibility for her being Filipino. So that was like a whole process to go through. And yeah, so once we got Frankie, a lot of that sort of dissipated because we were so far along in the process. But also like I could hear Frankie was like did something really cool in the audition. Yeah.
You've both mentioned the voice actors now. So how much does casting that actor, once you find them, how does that change your approach to the character as you're finishing them or as you're writing them? Like, it sounds like you both came into situations where you got your voice actor in and it like unlocked like the next level of developing this character.
I think for me, it locked Conduit down because there were, like, again, there were still a lot of things that were up in the air of how we wanted her to go. And Frankie could do, humor is really, really hard. And sincerity is even harder than humor to pull off. Like, people can pull off being funny, but you can't pull off sincerity. And so, like, having Frankie kill both of those things and be able to do like the really sad backstory things was excellent. And so it was more about like, now that we knew what space Frankie was really strong in, playing to those strengths and also making sure we didn't overplay some of the aspects. Otherwise, like, character becomes one-dimensional.
Yeah, I think for Alter and Christal, it was really more of just figuring out the way that Christal talks. It really helped me figure out like what are Alter's vocal tics and things like that, and the way that she would deliver her sentences, things like that. So it's similar to the process with Frankie, where you're kind of figuring out what their strengths are and everything. But I did kind of figure out the voice of the character before that. It was just, I could visualize it a lot more clearly now that I had Christal's voice in my mind.
Yeah.
When you write characters, do you ever have like an actor in mind, whether that's an actor that's in the space that you would like to play that character, or like an actor you like that you're like, oh, this would be this famous actor, this is what they want to sound like, and you put that forward? Or do you just kind of go in with that like anything's possible mentality for auditions?
I didn't have an actor in mind. I did have a very specific like list of like wants for the character. I have two specific lists because at the time we were thinking about going with like a Filipino accent, or like another sort of accent, whether it was an American accent or like another part of the diaspora. So I had a hard time finding a character like, and I talked a little bit about this with Nick and Max on Scriptlock, but I have a really hard time doing character likes because people latch on to different facets of that character or that actor, or like the voice. And the performance I was looking for was something that had to be able to pull off like really sad, like immigrant storyline shit, and also be like really funny and really relatable, but also like your best friend. Like she should be like fit, like have a very serious and sad side, and then be like really goofy, like you are when you're with your best friend being like dumb, Yeah. So I have a hard time doing character likes because people like when you go funny, people they just want to do funny, and when you do, like angsty, they kind of just want to do angsty.
Yeah, with Alter, it was like impossible for me to find the right character reference for that. Like we had a lot of like really great movement references. So this is also why it was like really difficult to cast her, because it was just so hard to like easily put out there the kind of performance that we wanted, especially because the type of personality she has is associated with characters that we didn't want her to be like necessarily.
I think anytime you put Asian woman on a casting sheet, it's like a lot of really different ways that it can go.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, and we did get some of those. We did get some of those, and on the audition sides too. like on the audition sides too, we actually put like, we are not looking for this type of performance.
Yes.
And then I could tell some people were like, so for Alter, she's like, she's not a good person. She's kind of evil. Like she's clearly a villain. Okay, she's a little she's my lovely chaotic princess. But yeah, like one of the things we put on there is like, we're not looking for a character like a woman that's going to be using her sexuality to like manipulate people. Like we don't want that kind of performance. And I know like I could feel that people were trying not to lean into that, but it was it's something that came naturally to them because there have been a lot of performances in the past where they're asking like Asian women who are being like quote unquote evil to do that kind of thing. So it was hard to get them out of that headspace because they're so used to it. And like that's what was difficult in terms of that process. I'm sorry, I totally forgot what the initial question was.
Well, this is part of the question. Yeah,
well, Jaclyn, I think you had a lot of trouble with like the dragon lady, like sexual stereotypes, and like me, I had a hard time with like the yellow fever and like submissive stereotypes of like Asian women and Filipino women, like in particular, just like being like, because like with fangirl, you have a lot of connotations for like fangirl is like obsessive, submissive, like fawning, and things like that. So there, even though like we would put those things on like a casting sheet, people would still try to play into those things because they've been to casting calls before where like they say that they don't want that thing, and then they'll be like, oh, can you like play this like Latina character more sassy? Can you like play this Asian character like more submissive, and things like that? And so I think there were a lot of people who they were like, I know what you're going to direct me towards, so I'm going to do that. And then I also think in the process there are a lot of people who don't understand or don't know the nuance of different ethnicities within like the Asia culture. So they would mix and match different attributes from different cultures, or be like, oh, like here's something that I've seen about like Filipino or like Korean or people on TV, and so that's what that nationality like is to me.
People fall back on what they know, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but
it often is stereotyped.
Yeah, and it definitely made it difficult for us to cast characters sometimes. And I will say that like that's almost a good thing that it was difficult for us to cast, because it means that we were actually doing something different than what people already know. So that was good. I've remembered what the initial question was now. So no, I didn't have a character in mind specifically, but there were certain lines that like characters would say that I thought, would fit well for Alter. And that's kind of what I was looking for with the voice actor as well. Like, how would they deliver this specific line in like Alter's way? Yeah.
Yeah. Christal Rose, you actually gave you did an interview with IGN like a little while back, and you gave them this amazing quote, and we actually kind of said, you guys started talking about it on your own, but I want to say it because I think it's important. It feels weird to you said it feels weird to talk about Asian American representation as a whole, because again, it's a tenuous alliance within the Asian community, because there is all of that history there for each of these communities. And you talk about how the Philippines have been invaded so many times, but there's so many different cultures that feel differently and there's prejudice against them. But you are all presented as this one identity rather than sort of going in like to the nuance. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
what? No, I wanted to talk about it. I thought you went to say something.
Well, I mean, just to plug Matt Kim's article. It's a really excellent article that they wrote in 2021 around the time of like, it was, I think, in reaction to like a lot of the anti-Asian sentiment during the pandemic, and then also the ramping up of a lot of hate crimes in America, and then the article came out just before like the Stop Asian Hate movement and a lot of the protests that were going on, because I think it was March 2021. I actually like skimmed through the article this morning because I thought you might ask me about this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it's called Asian American Developers Are Dreaming of Their Own Minari Moment by Matt Kim, and it's on IGN if anyone wants to read it. I think it's really good.
Good article.
Yeah. Sorry, what's the question about it?
No, I just wanted to you two have already elaborated on that sentiment quite a bit, in sort of the difficulties with casting and the wanting to make a character, like find actors that are, it sounds like, are conditioned into leaning into these stereotypes, because those seem to be the archetypes that kind of rise to the top whenever we're putting these games together. In that same article, you made a comment about ensemble games, how ensemble games seem to have a lot of really great representation and a lot of nuance, but that single player games, you don't see a lot of main characters from like specifically marginalized groups. And I just wanted to get your opinions on what we as an industry could be doing better, or what's something that as game creators we can think about when we get into those pre-production meetings and we start thinking about this. Like, what is a good way to start tackling that?
Yeah. Funnily enough, a few months after I interviewed for that article, I ended up getting Apex, so that was cool. But I think single player games there is more asterisk. So I think one of the things that we could be doing is, like, I know that there's a lot of love and a lot of drive and a lot of passion on the teams to make it happen. It's just like there's a lot, again, there's like still a lot of roadblocks to making it happen, and making it happen in like a good, nuanced way. I don't think a lot of my opinions have changed from 2021 regarding specifically Asian representation. I think Kevin Schultz was the one who mentioned that there's a lot, when they see representation in game, even when there is representation in games, there's a lot of cynicism that happens there, because they're wondering if it's appreciation or appropriation, because a lot of it comes in the form of, like, limited time events and like an additional payment skin that's not embedded into the game. And for single player games, you don't have even that, so you can really only go up. When it comes to it, you could there's just not a lot. Like when you do have Asian representation, it's often like samurai stuff. and they only want to do like feudal era Japan, and it's a very specific colonial masculine time in Japan's history.
Very
so
yes.
There aren't a lot of like playable women, queer people that are Asian. I don't see that much either. Again, there are a few games, I'm not going to say it's not happening, but I think that there are so many roadblocks, and often the one that people pretend is one is historical accuracy, and that's just not true.
And I'll just never shut up about this, but we need more diversity in like the leadership levels of the game industry. Because like honestly, how many? I mean, outside of because if you're an indie game studio, like a lot of people, there's a lot more diversity in like the higher levels of indie studios. But if we're talking about like AAA game companies, like how many CEOs of game studios are women? How many of them are people of color? Like how many of them are queer? Those are the people who like get the games made, and if they're the ones that are driving the vision, then those are the people who are going to be able to get more representation in like the protagonists, the main characters that you play in single player games. So I mean, even in just narrative, like I don't actually know very many writers of color who are in the like Christal Rose is one, but I was talking to my friend the other day, and I think it's maybe like I can count on both of my hands how many people I know who are like people of color that are writers in the game industry, which is kind of sad. So yeah, we just need to keep bolstering those people because those people have great ideas and they can drive great projects. It's just they can't make it to that position because there's so many gates and boundaries that are difficult for them to cross.
And to go back to your question of like how do we get those conversations going, like what do we do? And it's like it's hard to even get in the room to make that conversation happen. And then when that conversation starts happening, it's immediately sort of like, oh, but we want to do what's the coolest thing. And it's like, oh, so you don't think Asian people are cool? Like, and like things like that, where like there are just so many more cuts, there's so many more steps, and then there's like a weariness that like, oh, I am the one who always has to talk about like putting an Asian character in the game because I have an invested interest in like having an Asian character, because like, you know, other people don't. And so you really do lean on like the minorities on your staff to make sure that representation is happening. And like people say all day, oh, like we're a diverse, this is so spicy, oh, we're a diverse workplace, like, oh, like we do care, but like there's like a fundamental level of work that all of the minority people on your staff are doing that goes completely unseen to make sure that like it's salient, that it's inoffensive, that it's correct, that is not part of their job description, but they're like saving your ass. And that's work that I think a lot of white devs will never see is being done on like your team because they don't have like the cultural foundation to be doing cultural checks for other ethnicities.
I'm so glad you said that out loud and so eloquently because I feel like not a lot of, as we're talking about the people that are in leadership positions, and you are right, like our industry is very cishet white male top heavy. I said it out loud.
Not that we don't love them. Not that we don't love you. Not that we don't love you. You're doing a great job.
Some of you are excellent. Some of you are really great. Some of you.
Many of them are my friends.
Yes. No tea, no shade. It is how things have shaken out. We all saw that GDC State of the Industry survey. Nothing we are saying is not a fact. But I think I'm glad you said that out loud because I think we don't understand the level of work that you are putting in, the underrepresented people on our teams are putting in, and like the level of like, I don't want to call it brain drain, but there is like a very like metaphysical burden to being the person on your team that has to, you know, keep an eye out for that stuff.
Yeah. And that's how our Jaclyn and I's GDC talk sort of came about. Like we wanted to talk about those things, and the more we started talking with each other, the more we realized it had to be like a beginner's view into like what these topics sort of mean. Otherwise we would lose so much of the room very quickly. and I wasn't the only one who worked on Conduit. I know I talked a lot about Conduit, but you know, I wasn't the only one. There is Amanda Doran, who's the narrative director, Rachel Downing, who did the concept art, and you know, she did a lot of really great things for her. And Chris Winder, who's the designer, Yuri Rybalka, who did modeling, Mike Panoff, who did the FX animation, and then Frankie Kevich, who's the voice artist. Voice artist? What is that word?
Voice actor.
Voice actor. I just wrote down VA. And then Isabella, who is the mocap artist. And then there were like many animators who worked on it, like Hayden, Mario, Sophie, Ali. And then we also got together a Filipino readers group from across Respawn. That was AJ, Varilla, and Gabe. And Gabe's mom, actually, through Gabe, contributed a lot too. And then Pamela, who I got to meet at GDC, and John, Michael, and Johan. Johan and I actually still talk a lot. And then we had an external consultant who's Bianca, Bianca Katbagon.
I like how you have all these on the list. I don't have that list for Alter.
This is incredible though, because this is a reminder, like a very much a reminder to people that like games, like one person does not write their little script and are like, here you go by. Like it takes a lot of people, it takes a village to essentially like build the character, model them, design them, voice them, write them. Like that's such a good reminder. And I love that you have all their names written down.
I don't have all of them. I do have quite a lot. They're like, I think I miss like, obviously like, you know, QA and audio and stuff, but there were like a ton of people who worked on Conduit. I only got to know about 40 of them, but I only closely interacted with about 10 of them. And then, you know, all of the other people I didn't get to meet. So yeah. I
can shout out who I'm remembering right now.
Yes,
which
please.
is of course the central people on Alter, Ian Holstead, her designer, Xiao Yang, her artist, like bomb ass design for Alter. Amanda, of course, who is our narrative director, Eric Kraber, who and the rest of the audio team who went through that really, really long and intense casting process to find Christal Yu, Ultra's voice actor. There's Chelsea Sick, who is her mocap actress. Chloe Huang, who is was our authenticity reader. And of course, we had our internal readers group as well. So thank you to all of them. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch of people. Oh, of course, the animators, Cam and Sophie, who were my LA buddies when we went to go do that mocap shoot. And of course, Moy Para, who thank you for having me there. So many people. Ian actually created a long list of all the people who worked on Alter on Twitter. So if you want to see all of the people who worked on Alter, check that out. You can find it on my Twitter.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I made little Team 25 stickers for Conduit, and then I only got to meet like 10 of the people who worked on Conduit. So,
aww.
Yeah.
That's really cool, though.
Yeah, thanks for letting us shout them out.
In Kittlecat and Rowberry. Yeah.
I want to talk about your excellent GDC talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is on the Vault for anyone who has a Vault subscription and is listening. So
it's free actually to watch.
Oh, it's free?
Vault, so. Yes.
It's free. Okay, now everyone has to go watch it. So when you germinated on it, like, was this something where like the call for submissions, actually as we're recording this, the call for submissions for next year went out today.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, oh God, I haven't recovered from the last one.
That's exactly what
we were talking about like literally last week.
And they're due in like a month, which is also insane to me. So was it like the call for submissions came in and you were like, hey, we should talk about this? Or was this something that you were germinating on and kind of thinking like, is there a way to get it out there? Like, what was the moment you were like, this is a GDC talk and we're doing it this year?
So during the development of Conduit, I had what I called, and Jaclyn heard about this many, many times, the Comic-Con panel in my mind, where the Filipinos in my mind at the Comic-Con panel would raise me over questions about representation and like why I made certain choices about Conduit. Mm-hmm. And like in my head, I would like be backing it up and I'd be like, this statistics, like this is why I did this. And like, this is why I did this, you know, holding myself to task for, you know, getting her right. And I would have those conversations with Jaclyn like on a daily basis. And then as, you know, Jaclyn was also working on her own character, we would have these conversations all the time with each other. Yeah. Like what representation means, the weight of it, the responsibility we felt, like the mental health toll that it was taking, you know, what it means to be like the only one on the team. And then eventually we were kind of both like... we need to tell someone.
Well, we also had like a lot of talks about it within our own team too, because we are only the only writers of color that were
not me anymore.
Okay, well, we were the only writers of color on the Apex team at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we are fortunate that at Respawn everyone is very, very welcoming of diversity and wanting to like bolster our ideas and stuff like that. And obviously, like, you don't get characters like Conduit and Alter if people are not, right?
Yeah.
But even in that type of environment, it's really difficult to be the one to like have to speak on things all the time.
Yeah.
Or even
it really chips away at your social capital and the amount of feedback you can give when most of your notes are about like getting cultural attributes wrong or like making someone look wrong. And then, you know, when you give like too many pieces of feedback and people are like, well, I don't want to like listen to any more feedback, which is totally fair. When you have to use like 90% of your feedback on like culture and like stereotypes, it really eats away at like the amount of social capital you have. Sorry, go ahead, Jaclyn.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, some people would say, like, oh, they would shoot down your ideas or thoughts sometimes without even knowing that, you know, it's something important to you or something that's like culturally relevant, just because they don't have that type of background as well, which I can't blame them for. But when that happens to you a lot, it takes a big toll on your mental health. And yeah, it's just it's really hard to do over and over again, and to have to, you know, stand back up and say like, well, okay, I'm saying this for this reason, and then people will be like, yeah, okay, I understand now. But especially if, I mean, Christal Rose, you're working on Conduit, you're Filipino, she's Filipino. I was working on Alter, I'm Chinese, she's Chinese. Especially if it's something that's really close to you, it almost feels personal when people are saying that stuff to you, like your experiences are not valid and things like that.
It also feels like very much like a micro or a macro aggression for someone to be like, oh, well, we don't want to do that, that's not cool. Or like what for the example of like Conduit, there was a really long, like chopsticks kept coming into every scene that she was in, and I kept having to be like, most Filipinos don't use chopsticks culturally. They'll do it when they're eating another culture's food. And like giving that note over and over really wears you down.
Wow, that's like a very specific thing that feels like you could say it once and then maybe people would get it.
Well, and like the thing is, you know, it's like coming from a place where they're like, oh, Asian people eat with chopsticks, and you're like, that's a square rectangle thing. You are correct mostly. So in your talk, you specifically, and you kind of mentioned this already, having a storyline that directly addresses the aspect of a character's identity versus having a character who is their story is their identity. Could you break that down, that distinction, in your words, since you did it way more eloquently than I can probably paraphrase? Jaclyn, you want to go for this one?
Sorry, repeat that again, Alexa.
It's writing a storyline that directly addresses the aspect of a character's identity versus having a character who is, I think you said, merely an identity, or their story is their identity. Like, not a lot of people can very quickly see that distinction. So could you explain that distinction?
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about, for example, a character who's maybe, let's say they're gay or something, and maybe their main storyline is coming out. If their storyline is coming out, then that's a story that's part of their identity. Whereas we're talking about a more external part of the character, where is maybe this character is gay, but their storyline is about how they are having a very
loneliness or something.
Yeah, drama or loneliness. Like maybe they're having a fight with their parents, but it has nothing to do with them being like gay or something like that. Then that's a little bit more external. So it's important to have authenticity for both types of storylines. But it's just one that, like, one storyline addresses that more directly, and the other one is just there because it's part of the character.
And neither one is better than the other. Like they're different types of representation, and like I think you see this a lot with like queer and gay representation, where historically they weren't allowed like the fluffy like tropey romances that like hetero couples get to like chew on and are like delightful and soft. Like it's always about like trauma and things like that. But on the other side of that, like when people do see representation of just like fluffy, like fun romance for like queer romances, they're like, but that's not how it is in my everyday life. Like it is hard. There are things that I need to overcome because of prejudice. Like it's not that, easy or simple. And so both,
it's just not the only story that people have.
And so both storylines will get very correct criticism about what it is, but it doesn't mean both types of representation aren't, worthy.
Yeah. Did something else you mentioned in your talk is about potentially falling into like stereotype traps? You mentioned that I think, hold on, let's get your quote. Okay. Representation isn't just creating an ideal version of a specific race or ethnicity. It's about creating something authentic. And sometimes that can be less than perfect. And you talked about this in your talk when you were talking about making Conduit and Alter. So the risk of falling into those stereotypes, how do you recommend avoiding that trap, or when can you kind of tell that like a trap is coming? Like, how do you check yourself along the way in creating that authenticity that is still aspirational, but not necessarily falling into like what is stereotypically considered ideal?
I think you definitely need to know the stereotypes that are associated with the person you're creating. You definitely need to know what are some of the real life conflicts that they might be happening today, and maybe some of the history of like where they're from. I think one of the biggest traps that I see a lot of characters fall into is everything that's associated to that identity that person goes through, whether it be interests or hobbies, or like dramatic like trauma things, because they want to, like, people there's usually two reactions. They don't do enough research, and so they're relying on the idea that they've been told through all of these other movies, or they've done so much research that they want to put every possible reference into that character, and not every possible reference can live within a character. Not all women like pumpkin spice lattes. So
oh, that's a great one, actually.
Yeah, I think it's just about finding a balance, because I think in terms of stereotypes, you are probably going to fall into one at some point. Like, Alter likes bubble tea, and people always associate Chinese people or Asians with bubble tea, right?
Yeah.
But like that's not a bad thing that she likes bubble tea. It's just something that she likes. It's not everything else about her is also a stereotype. It's about just making sure that the character that you're creating actually feels like a real human being and just not a collection of stereotypes. And that's why it's important to have that knowledge. And not being afraid to sort of go into that territory if you need to, because a lot of stereotypes are based on some basis of truth. So I think there is some truth when you're creating a character and they do have like part of a stereotype in them.
Yeah.
I really like that quote. I support women's rights and also women's wrongs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, because not everything is going to be like perfect for this character. Everyone has flaws and everything. And actually, that was one of the things that I was really sort of nervous about, which when I was creating Alter, we wanted to create a villain, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, is she gonna fall into like evil Chinese person stereotypes and things like that? So that was something that I had to be really, really conscious about when we were creating her.
Yeah.
And as long as I maintained that conscientiousness about it, I was able to make sure like she does feel like a human being, and she is still a villain, but she's not just like this stereotypical Chinese lady who's evil.
Yeah.
When creating villain characters, I know I think you like villain characters. You seem like a villain character kind of writer to me. Do you think that there are more traps that you could potentially fall into when you're writing like a femme villain character versus say like a dude? Because I maybe feel like it's so easy to fall into these, like, again, like racial stereotypes or like the woman leaning into her sexuality stereotypes. Like, do you find that, like, do you find it that way as well? Or do you think there's different challenges?
I agree with you, but that's mainly because I don't think that we've seen a lot of women villains, and that's just, and they all seem to fall into the stereotype. Okay, I don't want to say all because I don't want to encompass all of them like that, but a lot of them do. And like I said, people always fall back on the things that they know, and so sometimes people just don't know anything else. Because like this is, for them, this is what a cool woman villain is like, so they'll go that way, but that's why it's also important to have women in your room so that they can tell you, like,
that's not to say like sexually evil characters aren't fun. It is really fun, but you know what would be fun? Sexually evil man. Let's do that. Let's do that one. I want to do that. I mean, I think that's why Asterion was such a hit, right?
Oh man, yeah. I can't wait for all the games coming out, because it takes 5 fucking years to make a game, excuse me. All games coming out 5 years from now and after are all going to have some variation of Asterion in it, because he's popular now.
Yeah,
so we're all like, this is our Asterion. Not that I've had that conversation with anyone on any of the projects I'm working on, but I've definitely heard it. So what is your recommendation to, again, you just mentioned have women in your writer's room. What is your recommendation to studio teams that maybe have a smaller writing team that is maybe not as diverse, or is looking to build their writing team? Like, what is your advice to them to help them achieve a writing team that can do what you two do, like checks for stereotypes, bring like really authentic backgrounds and stories to the table? Like, what do you think that we can do better as an industry, as groups? Like, what's your recommendation?
I think most hard and fast rules are wrong. I was talking to a writer at GDC, and they were telling me how no minority character, like on their team, they had a rule that no minority character could be evil. Only white characters could be evil. And that's its own
interesting
weird trap. And like, I think there are a lot of interesting things you can do, like dynamically with like colonialism, like when, your character is white, or if you're like going on a certain history, like if you want to talk about the imperialism of Japan. But I think when you set rules like that, you are closing your own doors, like for white, it's not that white people don't have enough representation, but if all games decided that all villains could only be white people, you are then telling one version of a story to that audience forever now, and so when you put like blanket rules like that on your team, I think it becomes very dangerous. And there were a lot of people, there were people in our feedback who did ask a lot. They were like, this wasn't for indie games. We wanted like, like a link of like, this person can sensitivity read for like all cultures and like all types of sexualities, socioeconomic backgrounds and like things like that. And that just doesn't happen. So when it comes to staffing up your team, or when it comes to a small team, or maybe it's not of the culture, you really need to dig into your research. I think it can similarly be dangerous to just ask the people on your team if like you have a Black person on your team and you're like, well, how do you feel about like this Black character I've created? Because like, although they have their own feelings about like what's going on, they might not have like the historical context. They might not have the knowledge base. They might not be, up to what's going on like social justice wise, or like what movements are going forward. So you need to be doing your own research, and then
and they might not be they might not want to be responsible for
they might not want
to
be responsible for that.
Yeah.
If you can't afford to pay someone, like, do research, talk to people that you know, who have that background. I'd say like podcasts and YouTube are actually pretty good resources for these things, because there are people on the internet who talk about their experiences and their background, and that's somewhere that you can start. But I mean, if there's someone who's also willing to volunteer, make sure they know what they're getting as well. Like maybe you could credit them at the end of the game for like helping with the authenticity edits and stuff like that. Make sure they're getting something out of it, because it's a lot of emotional labor.
I think a little bit of the talking to people you know in your life, that can be a little bit dicey too, because the people you have in your life usually, you know, have a little bit similar values to you. And so their knowledge basis might not be super different from you. So again, I think if you can have a consultant, if you can have someone who's completely external to you that has no investment in like you personally, to be able to give feedback, I think that is the way you're going to have the most like honest, direct feedback. And again, I know for smaller teams, for indie teams, you might not have the funding to be able to do it. But like Jaclyn said, there are a lot of resources online that you can look into and that you can read and watch, and, you know, and you might not feel like you're doing the right thing, or you might like doubt yourself in the avenues that you're exploring. But I mean, like, again, like Jaclyn said, like Jaclyn is Chinese and I am Filipino, and both of us were very much had a lot of thoughts about like the representation we were doing for representing our, you know, our own cultures. So I don't think there's ever going to be a moment where you're going to be like, no one of this culture, no one of this sexuality is going to be pissed at me for this representation.
Someone will always be pissed.
Someone will always be pissed.
But I'm sure there will be a lot of people who are like happy with it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't, we are learning as an industry, you cannot please everyone, but you just got to keep making art, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. This was so incredible. I'm so happy I got to talk to you too. Your GDC talk, free on the vault, title, Creating Diverse Characters, Writing What You Know and Don't. Please go watch it. And thank you both so much.
Thank you so much, Alexa.
Thank you.
Yeah.